Welcome to Compassionate Conversations, where we push the boundaries of comfort to empower you to become all that you dream of being. Hi, I'm Esther Kane. I'm a Canadian psychotherapist and the author of It's Not About the Food, A Woman's Guide to Making Peace with Food and Our Bodies. For over 25 years, I've been helping people to overcome problematic relationships to food and their body image. And to my great delight, my book has helped thousands of people to do just that. I decided to do this series where I interview other body image warriors who I respect and love their work in order to help us form more of a community around talking about our disordered relationship with food and our bodies, in the hopes that we will find strength in each other's stories and share some really helpful tools and methods that you can use in order to heal your relationship with food and how you see your body. If you're thinking, I don't know if I have an eating disorder, so maybe these videos won't be meaningful to me, please give it a chance. When I tell people, for example, that I'm an eating disorder therapist, people automatically think eating disorders are just anorexia and bulimia. And while I treat those issues in my practice, the bulk of my clients tend to fall into the category of emotional eating. People who eat when they're mad, sad, glad, and fearful. There's all kinds of reasons that we turn to food. And they are usually the people that are yo-yo dieters, that do obsessive exercising. Maybe they are in middle age and their body's metabolism has changed and they've put on some extra weight and they just can't seem to get it off. All of these people fall into the category of some type of disordered eating pattern. So if that applies to you, please stay tuned. I'm going to be interviewing some fabulous people in this series who will definitely give you some great ideas and tips in order to make peace with food and your body. Welcome to Compassionate Conversations, the Food and Body Image series. I am so excited about today's episode where I will be interviewing Joy Kiddie, the low-carb, healthy fat dietitian. Joy provides a range of low-carb and ketogenic services. She is a member of Canadian Clinicians for Therapeutic Nutrition, a group of Canadian physicians and healthcare professionals that utilizes evidence-based dietary interventions to improve and, when possible, to reverse the symptoms of chronic nutritionally related diseases. Joy also practices what she preaches. She has been following a low-carb and ketogenic diet for the past 5 years and has lost a substantial amount of weight and put her type 2 diabetes and high blood pressure into remission. Welcome, Joy.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I just wanted to start by saying that I've worked with countless numbers of dietitians over the past 25 years because I'm an eating disorders therapist and I usually work collaboratively with dietitians. And I'm also a low carber myself for over a decade.
Awesome.
And I have found that for the most part, there seems to be a lot of resistance in your field to low carb diets in general. That's why I was so excited to have you on the show. And as I was learning about you, I imagine that it must have taken great courage to break out of that mentality in your field. So why did you choose? I mean, you changed your entire approach to dietetics in 2015, I understand, which then like the work you do now. So yeah, what made you make such a leap? How did you do it?
Well, let's take it back to the first thing that you said about there being a lot of resistance in my field about low carb and ketogenic diets. I think largely that's because people don't understand what they are and what they aren't. Mm-hmm. And I think even the general public has a view that, a keto diet means like whipping cream and bacon fat and tons of butter and fatty meat. And, there's a, and
The
this is
bulletproof coffee, the
yeah,
butter.
bulletproof coffee, exactly. I once tried that. It's
It's
horrible. I don't know
disgusting.
how
I know.
anyone and why would someone want to do that to a really good cup of coffee anyways?
Right.
But I think people think, I call it the popularized keto.
Yes.
And
It's
that's the
very-
one that you see on the internet that's promoted by, big name people. And it's basically a very, very, high fat, low protein or moderate protein and low carb restricted diet.
Yeah.
But that's not all, on my webpage for the low carb, healthy fat dietitian, I say there's no one size fits all low carb or ketogenic diet, because there isn't. It ranges from anything from, 20 to 30 grams of carbohydrate for a woman to 50 grams for a guy for a ketogenic diet, right up to 130, which is a low carb diet, and anywhere in between, and different levels of protein, different types of fat, depending. So it's very individualized, very customizable for each individual situation. So I think a lot of dietitians formerly anyway had a preconceived idea that it was what they saw on the internet. And I think a lot of people in the general public think keto is this. They come to me and they say, but I don't like XYZ. Don't worry, you don't have to eat that.
Yeah.
As far as me breaking out of that kind of mold, it came as a result of a personal crisis. I was not just overweight, I was obese. I had type 2 diabetes for 8 years.
Wow.
And I developed.
And you were a dietitian.
And I was a dietitian with a master's degree, graduated from Yale and got a master's degree at UBC. So, I studied, I knew, I researched, I published, but I also grew up with Canada's Food Guide.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, I remember the new Canada's Food Guide from 1977.
Yeah, I remember it too. Yeah.
That's
when
I
we
remember
started to
when
go
it came
downhill.
out, thinking 7 to 12 servings of carbohydrate per day. That can't be right.
Yeah.
Well,
they were trying to lower the fat back
they
then.
were trying to lower the fat. And I have so many articles about that and the politics that were involved. I had 2 girlfriends die.
Oh.
One of a heart attack and one of a stroke.
Oh my gosh.
Both were in healthcare their whole lives.
Really?
One was a nurse, public health nurse, who retired on Friday and was dead on Monday.
Oh my gosh.
And another one worked in a long-term care facility as a care aide and came home from work and died of a massive heart attack, and her daughter found her on the floor.
Oh my goodness.
And I realized that if I didn't change what I was doing, I was going to be next.
So how old are these people, Joy?
My age. As I call us, women of a certain age.
Fierce. That's what I say.
Yeah, you know the poem about wearing, I will wear purple when I'm a woman.
Yeah. Fantastic.
We all wore purple.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. Wow. But that was a real week,
I realized I had to change. And then I had a girlfriend of mine who was a retired physician came to me. Actually, it wasn't a close friend. It was somebody I knew, came to me and wanted to put a family member on a low carb diet because their blood sugars were high and they had high cholesterol. And all I remember about low carb was Atkins in the 70s.
Yeah.
And I was like, of course, I had all these preconceived ideas of why that was bad. But she was a physician, and she actually had me reading Dr. Fung's blogs way back before he published books, before he became the big guru in the high-fat keto diet.
Yes.
And he was just a blog writer at that point. And I read through, she said, read some of his blogs and let me know what you think. Well, I started reading, and he had all the links to all the studies. And of course, I'm very nerdy, so I read through all of them. Not all of them. I read and read and read. And I got back. I said, how many are there of these? And at that point, there were only 6 months of them. And I had read through 3 months of them, and he had all the studies and all the, literature. So essentially, it enabled me to examine the literature of what a low carb and ketogenic, and this is going back 7 years ago. This is 2015.
Yeah.
It was a game changer. And I realized that I had to change the way I did meal plans.
Right.
And I asked my clients at the time who I was designing meal plans for if they would wait 2 or 3 months to have their meal plan done, because I'm going to be doing them differently. And I told them why. I said I
Yeah.
could do it the way I've been doing it, or I could do it the way I will be doing it from now on. And
Right.
all my clients at the time decided to wait.
Good.
They waited 3 months because I had to read through the stuff. I actually contacted Dr. Fung at the time, and he was gracious enough to teach me what he
Ah,
did and why he did it. And
yeah.
that's how I started, was as a high fat keto, approach.
Yeah. That took chutzpah.
Yeah, it was really, the evidence was there even then. And this is
Yeah.
before Verta. This is
7
before,
years ago.
all the studies that have been done since.
Yeah, tons now.
Tons.
Yeah.
And I started writing my blogs, which is under the Food for Thought tab at
Which are great, by the way.
Thank
I
you.
love that's how I got
350. Like I have
You're
350
amazing.
articles on the LCHFRD site.
It's
and they're
incredible.
all categorized.
It's like a library it's amazing.
But thank you. The reason I started writing it was to defend my license. If somebody came after me.
Yeah, I could see how you would have some trepidation about that.
I sure
Because
did.
it's I've heard a lot of interesting things about.
Well, we know some very famous people who've been called up to the carpet on this.
Yeah.
Well, October 18th, I was invited by Diabetes Canada to speak at a conference representing a low carb and ketogenic diet in the remission of type 2 diabetes.
Oh my goodness. Okay, change is happening. This is very good news.
They had been following me for 2 years.
Holy
All
smoke.
the blogs I wrote.
Yeah.
And I was sitting there going, okay, when's the shoe gonna drop?
You're a maverick. Yeah.
And I spoke at a conference with 2 other dietitians.
Yeah.
And I represented a low carb and ketogenic diet.
Fantastic. It's so wonderful. I think it's people like you that have the guts to, go out there and, especially when something's new, like right now I'm reading Brain Energy by Dr. Chris
The book
Palmer.
is right over there. I'm reading it too.
Amazing. And he's talking about the link between, he's saying that he's a psychiatrist at Harvard. He's a professor at Harvard for 25 years.
Assistant professor.
But he's been saying that he's established that there's a link that all metabolic, disorders cause mental illness and vice versa. There's a
Are
bidirectional.
you familiar with Dr. Georgia Eat? She's also a psychiatrist.
I am having her on my show. Yeah, I'm
wonderful.
so excited. And I have paid her for her time to help me with my mental health. She's unbelievable. So
I've been following her articles in Psychology Today and writing about what she does.
Yeah.
For the last
coming out with a book.
I know, she told me.
Woo-hoo. Yeah. I'm imagining that people listening to this, watching this, most of them, my clients would have extensive experience with all the fad diets that are out there, have tried most of them, haven't achieved their goals in the long run. So they may be pessimistic about this low carb keto thing as thinking it's just another fad diet. And I know you've talked about how it's not, but in your extensive education, clinical experience, and research in this area, can you please address this concern? Why is this not a fad? If you want to add anything.
Well, if a fad started in 1916, then it's a fad.
Good point. So what happened?
Russell Wilder, who is known for developing a ketogenic diet for epilepsy.
Yes.
Before he did so for epilepsy, and there's 2 articles under the Food for Thought tab.
Go check them out.
Page. One of those 350.
We'll have that in the show notes, by the way. Yeah.
He started playing with using a ketogenic, low carb and ketogenic diet in people with diabetes. And in 1921, he and 2 dietitians from the Mayo Clinic wrote a 69-page book titled A Primer for Diabetic Patients, which outlined the treatment for diabetes using low carb and very low carb, which is a ketogenic diet, and short periods of fasting, 12 to 48 hours.
Oh my
The
God.
last printing of the book was in 1950. which means
Oh,
it was used in the treatment of diabetes from 1921 to 1950. If this is a
wow.
fad, it's a very long fad.
Well, then that's so interesting because then politically, Joy, I'm just thinking what had to happen for that to go out of vogue and to go
Oh, it's
under.
in the article.
Okay, well, we're going to.
Including which pharmaceutical company sponsored giving insulin to the people who were in the study for free. Sorry, for $2 a unit,
Oh my, wow.
so
Okay,
that they no longer had to continue to do this real whole food diet, and they could just use
wow.
insulin instead. It is not a fad.
Yeah.
It's been, it was picked up again in the 70s by Atkins and used for weight loss and also for diabetes. Then in the when was it? 2018, which was already 3 years into me practicing as a low carb, healthy fat dietitian. American Diabetes Association recognized it as safe and effective. And
Wow.
the European Association for the Study of Diabetes recognized it as safe and effective. And then in 2020, Diabetes Canada recognized it as safe and effective. And then in October of this year, I was the first low carb ketogenic dietitian invited to speak at a conference representing a low carb and ketogenic diet in the maintenance in achieving remission of type 2 diabetes. And
Wow.
yeah,
So
so it's
for those
not
of
a
you with
fad. It's
diabetes, yeah,
definitely not a fad.
that's amazing. I just want to give an aside that, just to everybody out there, that I myself have followed a low carb keto way of eating for over a decade with amazing results. So, it is the number one thing it has done is it's greatly improved my mental health. I used to suffer from debilitating anxiety, and since adopting the ketogenic low carb diet, I would say that it has improved by 75%.
Wow.
I'm not kidding. And the fact that I have a YouTube channel and a podcast says it all. I used to be so anxious. I wouldn't have done this. I easily found my body's set point in terms of my shape, my size, my weight. I have maintained the same dress size easily for over 10 years without thinking about it. I have had unbelievable freedom, complete freedom from food addiction and what I call snacksidents.
Mhm.
My meals are always satiating and delicious, and I don't have cravings between meals. I can go hours without eating. And I just wanted to, on this train of thought, because I work mostly with people with eating disorders, mostly with compulsive overeating and food addiction. Joy, I would love to hear your thoughts on how a low carb or keto way of eating can help resolve these issues, or in your opinion, if it can. And if not, what advice do you have for people that fall into these categories?
In my experience and my understanding from working with people with both compulsive overeating and food addiction, and being, having, I guess, 20 years of experience interfacing, my understanding is that they're related but different disorders. So compulsive overeating, in my understanding, is not always about the food.
Right.
It's sometimes people needing to fill what I call a non-food void.
I would say,
And
you know what else I would call it, Joy, is emotional eating.
emotional, yeah,
Is
absolutely.
that kind of what you're thinking there?
Yes and no. Sometimes it's a relationship. Sometimes it's how they feel about themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's a void left by grief at the death of a loved one.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not necessarily the emotion, which is the response to the thing, but that it's a void, it's an emptiness, and that they're trying to fill it with food when
Yeah.
really it needs someone like yourself to work through.
Or I would say stuff feelings down, perhaps, that they don't want to feel. Like
Yes,
maybe in a case of someone who's died, the grief, the loss,
yeah,
the sadness.
yeah. So it's trying to I call it a non-food void, because it's really not about the food. It's more
Yeah.
about the emotions or the event. Whereas food addiction also isn't really about the food, but for a different reason.
Yeah.
It's my opinion that food addiction is a dependence on the chemicals that our body produces in response to the foods that we eat, namely from the pleasure centers of our brain, which of course relates back to my master's research, the dopamine, the endocannabinoids, the endo-opioids, that our body produces these natural chemicals in response to the foods we eat. And people become addicted to those chemicals that are highly addictive. And one of the things that, that I have on my website, I think it's was on the previous page. Yeah, I have it on my website that it's people don't have weak wills that keep them from being able to keep from overeating. They have strong chemicals that their body produces in response to the foods that they eat.
Well, and could we add one more thing, Joy, that I think, and Dr. Vera Tarman, who wrote
Yes, I know Vera too.
You've been on her show. She's coming on my show. I'm going to be on
She's
her show.
awesome. I have her book, and I refer a lot of people to her book because it's very helpful.
She's amazing. But so she talks about the physical addiction, and I want to speak to as well the whole thing about, I'd love to get your take on this, but we've never lived in a time when we've had access to so many highly processed foods that are they're engineered to be highly addictive.
Absolutely.
People, these companies pay billions of dollars to get food scientists
to get that point of irresistibility.
Yeah.
There are several books that have been written about that, the amount of salt, sugar, and fat, and how it's carefully engineered. And they have focus groups, and they pay hundreds of millions of dollars. That idea from Pringles, you bet you can't just eat one, is not an accident. It was designed that way, and so are Doritos, and so are Twinkies, and so are all the other foods. And what I tell people is it's not that you have a weak will. These are extremely strong chemicals. The dopamine drives it, but then the endo-opioids and the endocannabinoids that our body produces is what we become addicted to. The food is what, and Vera's book really talks about it well. It's that endless ceasing for that high that you got the first time you ate it that you never achieved, that drives the food addiction. But I think what reinforces it is that seeking the chemical response that we get from those, from the pleasure center of our brain, which is different than somebody who drinks alcohol or uses drugs, because then you're addicted to you've got the substance itself and the body's response to it. So I think it's both. So so compulsive overeating is not always about the food. Food addiction is about the food, but not in the way we think. It's not about the pizza or the bagels, which you've probably heard me talk about, which are my addictions, not Toronto bagels, Montreal bagels.
Montreal bagels. So what's the difference for those who don't know, Joy?
Well, as I tell Tro Kalajian from the Low Carb MD, everything else except the Montreal bagel is a roll with a hole.
My mother always said that they were boiled. The difference was in
they're boiled in honey water and then flipped in either sesame seeds or poppy seeds, because in Montreal there's only two choices: this everything bagel or onion bagel or blueberry. This didn't exist.
No.
And they're baked on planks that are put in a wood burning oven. And I realized that my two foods that I'm addicted to are pizza that's baked in a wood burning oven and bagels that's baked in a wood burning oven. So I think this is much more about memories of my childhood and events that bring back so much pleasure and happiness that have reinforced the carbs and the fat and the chemicals that go with it. Compulsive overeating is best addressed with someone like you and me working in tandem with somebody, because there's the non-food aspects that I don't do. I will work with somebody who's seeing a counselor and I provide the food end of things. But at the same time, you're training, even though and obviously an awful lot about low carb and stuff like that, your training isn't in food either.
No, and I can't really talk about that. And I would get it very stressed. That's why I'm so excited to have you on the show, because I want my clients to watch and hear this and, get them, because this is the piece that I don't do, but I advocate strongly. And while we're on that, I just want to hammer home this. So with the food addiction, Joy, where do you think the keto low carb part comes in? Do you think that eating that way can help you curb physiological food addiction?
Well, the physiological the addiction is to the foods that they're eating.
Yeah.
So I believe the solution is threefold. First, the person has to, with the help of, a dietitian that understands these things, which I do, understand what's driving the food addiction. What are the foods that they're eating that are triggering that response in their brain that either contributes to the food addiction or the overeating? And it's different for each person. I mean, you might not think, pizza in a wood burning oven is such a great, and you wouldn't,
Well, for my clients, it tends to be there's either sweet or
Mhm.
salty.
Yeah,
And
I get the same thing. It's
always carbs though.
it's
Always
always it's carbs and fat together.
carbs and fat. You're right.
Always together.
Yeah.
And
They're
what
not gonna eat a baked potato with nothing on it, right? Yeah.
it's always the carbs and fat together. And once they realize this, it's like the light bulb goes off and they start thinking of all the foods that they can't control. And they're always carbs and fat. It's pizza, it's Doritos, it's whatever. Like for me, it's not the bagel by itself, it's the bagel with the cream cheese and the lox and whatever on it. And the pizza, it's not just the crust, it's the cheese melted all over it. So it's the combination of both. To eat foods that provide, and you talked about it, providing the satiety, the not feeling hungry, so that you don't want to eat between meals.
Yeah. Well, so that your brain is fueled by fat rather than carbs, than glucose, right? Is that kind of the idea? And
it doesn't even have to be super high fat. Like you mentioned Ted Naiman. Ted has been a very big part of me moving from a very high fat ketogenic approach across the board. And I still use it. There's certainly, whether it's in people with glioblastoma or, cancer remission or seizure disorder, epilepsy, there's definitely reasons why a very, very high fat ketogenic diet has therapeutic benefits.
But not for women of a certain age, right?
Thank you. Yes, you've been reading my articles. Yes, it's definitely not. But Ted Naiman was the one that was the impetus for me changing my view towards higher protein. And balancing the amount of fat and the amount of protein, and really much more in favor of higher protein. He's, his influence on my clinical practice, moving away from the Dr. Fung approach, which has its uses. My approach is much like
the PE diet. I just want to say that
PE is one, and I have quite a few articles about protein to energy ratio.
Which are
there are I've written a couple of articles where I feel that his calculator that he used kind of took it too far, and that the amount of protein was perhaps exceeding the amount that the kidneys could deal with. So now that calculator's disappeared from his website, so I
interesting.
But his approach and his knowledge of the insulin mechanism and why eat more fat. Like if you're trying to burn body fat, you don't want to eat it dietarily. You want to burn your own fat. And I came across that about 3 years ago, or maybe 4 years ago, I guess. And that changed. So now I have a whole range of approaches that I use, different approaches with different people, depending on their culture, depending on whether they have food addiction, whether they are compulsive overeaters, whether.
Can you give us some examples, Joy? Because I think the audience would love that. Like, in what situations would you use different techniques? So maybe talk about what you would do with compulsive overeater. What would you suggest in that?
Well, it's not so much that I would use a different approach for based on that. That way, maybe I can answer your question a little bit differently. I think, first of all, there's different kinds of disordered eating. There's compulsive overeaters. There's anorexia, which is self-starvation.
You segued into my next
binging and purging. Orthorexia, where people
Yeah.
are obsessed with only eating healthy foods or
Yes.
compulsive exercise. So
Yes.
there isn't a one, my motto on my low carb website is there's no one size fits all low carb or ketogenic diet.
Yeah.
And I'd answer your question with saying, depending on what kind of disordered eating a person has, there isn't one approach that's going to work for all of them.
Mhm.
That the important thing is really to recognize that this disordered eating is not primarily about food,
Right. Right.
which
There's
is
many.
why someone like you is invaluable to my practice,
Mm.
because there are people, until I met you, there wasn't anyone I could refer. I mean, I know I referred people to eating counselors, overeating counselors,
Yeah.
some of
Yeah.
Vera's companions, and
Yeah.
who do that kind of guidance. I have clients that see them, but doing the hard work, the counseling part, the understanding why they and from my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, often it has to do with control or a lack of control and wanting
Yeah.
to exhibit.
Well, my book is actually called "It's Not About the Food," and yeah, and it's a workbook, and there's so many components that foster eating disorders, and yeah, there's so many levels, and we're just scratching the surface. But it's true, but that's why we all need each other. We need to have these conversations with each other.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
And we need to have our clients work with all, different professionals and different
I
areas.
tell people who come to me with either overeating is not I can work with often by myself because but definitely food addiction. They need to work with somebody who's trained, who understands,
Mhm.
they have to read Vera's book. Every one of my clients
So
who come,
good.
they have to read Vera's book.
Yeah. Yeah.
They have to understand what it is and what it isn't. But someone like you is invaluable because it's not about the food. As you say, you picked a great title for your book. It's not about the food.
Mhm.
So dietary support is different. So somebody who's got who's compulsively overeating, or orthorexia, where they're compulsive of what they eat, and
Let's talk
put them
about
on a
orthorexia.
keto.
Because that's
Sorry.
Let's talk about orthorexia, Joy, because that's such a huge topic. It's becoming so common these days. Tell us what.
And I have people who come to me who are measuring to the 10th of a gram everything they're eating, and in Vera's approach in the book, she has people weighing food.
Depends what the situation
But
is.
it's not all, you can't always,
Some people that makes it worse. And some
just
people
like a keto diet would make it worse for somebody because it's about eating as much fat as you can.
Yeah.
I have people who
So
literally
you can't leave the house because you go to the bathroom all the time.
eat a whole pound of butter.
Yeah. What is
No, I'm serious. So
yuck.
I would not recommend a keto diet, a high fat keto diet, to someone who's got compulsive addiction issues.
Yeah, because then they can get addicted to that. Yeah.
So separating the carbs and the fat and focusing, Ted Naiman's approach, focusing on the protein.
Yeah.
And, a little bit of carbs depending on their metabolic needs.
Yeah.
And
everyone's so different, and different stages
everybody's
of life,
different.
gender, right? Age. Yeah.
So
Activity level.
it's the other thing that I feel is very important, is establishing regular eating times. The things we used to call meals.
Yeah, right. When
This
we didn't
grazing thing is not helping because, well, you probably know from reading the mental health book, but the spiking of the insulin, spiking of blood glucose, spiking of insulin, the
all the
roller
time.
coaster stuff. So establishing eating times and not eating times, this is something that's very important.
Joy, was there anything that we didn't get to that you wanted to say?
I don't think so. I think it's more a question of people understanding that it's not that they have weak wills.
Yeah, I like that.
They didn't end up either obese or with food addiction or with compulsive overeating because they lack some kind of willpower.
Yeah.
It's the strong chemicals that their body produces in response to what they eat not that they have weak wills. And when they can
Mhm.
work with clinicians such as you and me who understand this and can help them to identify why they eat the foods that they eat and how to, unplug from that mechanism and work through the process. Well, you and I are both living proof that you can become free from these things.
Yeah, I've learned a lot about that in a kind of funny way during COVID, because I just went back to in-person therapy after almost 3 years of not seeing people in person, but people were eating in front of me on Zoom.
Yeah.
So we actually had some very productive conversations about the types of food they were eating.
Well, I
And,
continue to see people this way because it's so efficient for what I do and for what the people who work with me, and they also feel free to eat in front of me, and we also have some good discussions about it.
that's great. Yeah. Well, it's been a delight, Joy. I look forward to putting this out there in the world, and I'm sure people will just absolutely love what you have to say.
Excellent. Thank you for inviting me on.
Yeah, thank you.